Order gave me comfort. It wasn't just about routines, it was about structure, predictability, the safety of knowing what came next. My mornings started the same way every day. Alarm at 6:30, a short shower, coffee brewed precisely to my liking, 2 pieces of toast, one with butter, one without. I would read the news in silence, then leave the house at 7:30 sharp. My husband would still be asleep most mornings, and we rarely spoke unless necessary. We weren't unhappy exactly. We were functional, polite, familiar in the way that people become after sharing a roof for too many years. Our daughter had moved out long ago, and the house had settled into a quiet rhythm that suited us both. Work was where I felt most myself. I was respected, efficient, always one step ahead. My desk was neat, my calendar color-coded, my email inbox near empty. I knew how to handle pressure, how to solve problems, how to maintain boundaries. People came to me for answers, for direction, and I provided both without hesitation. There was a quiet satisfaction in that, in being the person others relied on. I didn't seek out distraction. I didn't linger over idle chatter in the break room or extend lunches unnecessarily. I had my small circle of colleagues, most of whom I'd known for years, and our interactions were pleasant but surface level. I kept my private life neatly tucked behind the walls of my professional persona. Even after hours, my routines extended like clockwork. A quick grocery run on Wednesdays, wine and laundry on Fridays, long walks alone on Sunday mornings. Nothing unexpected, nothing out of line. There was something calming in knowing exactly who I was and where I fit. I didn't ask myself questions I didn't want answers to. I didn't yearn for adventure or passion or upheaval. Those things belonged to other people, people with unfinished business or restless hearts. I had made peace with the life I had built. It was solid, predictable, safe. And yet, there were moments, fleeting and quiet, when I would catch my reflection in the mirror and wonder what had softened in me. Not regret exactly, not emptiness either, but a kind of stillness that sometimes felt too still, like the surface of a pond untouched by wind. I would shake it off, return to my tasks, remind myself that not every life needed to be stirred into movement. Some lives were meant to be steady, controlled. I believed mine was one of them, until the day she arrived. It started subtly, the way a breeze enters a room through a half-cracked window, barely noticed at first, then impossible to ignore. She began stopping by my office more often, sometimes with a question, sometimes just with a smile and an easy lean against the doorframe. She had a casual confidence that I envied, a kind of relaxed magnetism that drew people in without effort. I told myself it was nothing unusual. She was just friendly, curious, new to the company and looking for connection. I had no reason to suspect anything else. Still, I noticed the way her eyes lingered when we talked, the way she remembered small details about my preferences, how I took my coffee, which pens I used, which kind of music I kept on low in the background. She had a way of turning ordinary interactions into something charged, like there was an undercurrent only she could feel, and I was just beginning to detect. One afternoon, we ended up in the break room alone, both avoiding the chaos of back-to-back meetings. The conversation drifted, as it often did with her, away from work. We started talking about relationships, past ones, awkward ones, the lack of them. She had this open way of speaking, unafraid of turning over topics most people kept private. When she brought up sex, it wasn't crude or forced. It just flowed, like the topic belonged on the table as naturally as anything else. She told me about a friend who had an entire drawer full of toys. Her tone was playful, teasing, but there was a knowing look in her eyes as she asked if I'd ever tried anything like that. I laughed, more from surprise than amusement, and deflected at first, but she pressed gently, curious. I admitted to a few things, cautiously, carefully, more out of some odd desire to seem unshockable than to actually confess. She leaned in closer as I spoke, listening intently, and when I mentioned a small bullet vibrator I'd once received as a gift, she raised an eyebrow and asked if that was all. Her tone was light, but the question landed deeper than it should have. We started talking about size, not men, but toys, the absurdity of some of the ones sold online, the exaggeration of shape and function. I remember saying something about how unrealistic they were, and she countered with a smirk that sometimes unrealistic was exactly the point. She described one in particular, long and curved, designed to hit a place she called the edge between need and ache. Her voice dipped low as she said it, and I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. I tried to laugh it off, but something about her phrasing stuck with me long after the conversation ended. There was no touch, no confession, no clear intention, but my body remembered that moment like a touch. The way her voice slowed, the way her fingers absently traced the rim of her coffee cup as she described texture, weight, vibration. I left the room feeling unsettled, aware of her in a way I hadn't been before, aware of myself, too, in a new way. That night, I couldn't stop replaying it. Her words, her face, the slight narrowing of her eyes as she studied my reaction. I told myself it was harmless, just a joke, just women talking the way women sometimes do when the doors are closed. But my heartbeat had quickened for a reason, and I couldn't ignore how vivid the images became when I was alone. Not of the toys, but of her. Her mouth, her hands, her voice like silk, brushing against a part of me I hadn't realized was still alive. Whatever it was, it hadn't started with intent, but something had shifted, and I felt it now in every glance, every pause, every breath we shared in close quarters. I didn't know what she was doing. I didn't even know what I was feeling, but it was there now, between us, a spark, small, persistent, and dangerously real. Fridays were usually uneventful. A slow wind down from the week, paperwork wrapped up, inboxes cleared, people quietly slipping away by late afternoon. That Friday felt no different. The office lights had begun to dim as one by one, desks emptied. I stayed behind, not out of obligation, but because the silence felt easier than going home. I told myself I needed to finish a few things, but I was mostly avoiding the quiet routine that waited for me beyond the walls. I noticed she was still there too, her light still on, her soft footsteps moving down the hall with no particular urgency. We didn't plan it, it just happened. She appeared at my door near 6, a bag slung over her shoulder, her hair slightly messier than usual. She asked if I was heading out soon. I hesitated, then said I wasn't in a rush. She offered me a ride. I don't know why I said yes. The parking lot was empty and dim, the sky beginning to shift into its evening hues. Her car smelled faintly of citrus and something floral. The music was low, something soft with a steady rhythm. We didn't talk much. The silence between us had become a thing of its own, familiar, comfortable, but weighted now in ways I didn't fully understand. When we pulled up to my house, the porch light blinked on automatically. I thanked her, unbuckled my seatbelt, and paused. I heard myself inviting her in before I could stop myself. She accepted without hesitation. Inside, the house felt too quiet, too clean, too neutral. I kicked off my shoes and offered her a glass of wine. She took it and followed me into the kitchen, where I lit a small candle on the counter, more out of habit than intent. The room filled with a faint amber glow. We stood there, sipping slowly, leaning against opposite counters, shoulders relaxed, but eyes constantly meeting. She moved a little closer with each sip. We talked, though I barely remember the words. Something about childhood foods, something about music that always made us cry. But the words were placeholders. The real conversation was happening in the air between us. She set her glass down first, walked toward me like she'd done it 1,000 times. Her fingers grazed mine, feather-light. I didn't move away. Her hand settled on my wrist. The warmth of her skin was immediate. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between certainty and hope. I felt everything inside me still. My breath caught. I didn't speak. I didn't stop her. Her lips found mine slowly. Not tentative, not apologetic, just quiet, full, like a question I didn't need to answer. My mouth opened to her instinctively, and the first real kiss unraveled something inside me I had kept tightly wound for years. Her hand cupped the side of my neck, and I leaned into it, hungry for the closeness, for the soft pressure of her thumb against my skin. I felt heat gather between my ribs, spreading lower with every second. We moved toward the living room, wordless and aligned. The couch became a landscape of newness. She guided me down gently, never breaking eye contact. Her body slid next to mine, then half over me, the weight of her thigh pressing into mine just enough to make me ache. Her fingers slipped beneath the fabric of my blouse, tracing the edge of my bra, and I exhaled sharply, caught off guard by the intensity of sensation. I touched her in return, hesitant at first, but my hands found confidence in her warmth. Her skin was soft, her breath even softer against my neck. When she slipped her hand beneath my waistband, I gasped, not from surprise, but from recognition. I was open to her, body, breath, everything. She touched me slowly, thoroughly, like she had all night to learn what made me tremble. And when I came undone beneath her, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet, deep, like something essential had shifted, not just in my body, but in the way I understood myself. After, she lay beside me, her head resting against my shoulder. I stared at the ceiling, heart thudding, skin buzzing. I didn't want to speak, didn't want to break the silence that had cradled us all night. She rose after a while, kissed my cheek without a word, and let herself out. I stayed on the couch long after the door closed. The candle had burned low. The wine sat forgotten. My body still tingled from her hands, her mouth, her breath. The night didn't end with clarity. It ended with stillness, with heat lingering under my skin, with the knowledge that something once dormant had been stirred awake. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I felt alive. The morning after, I moved through the day as if underwater. Everything looked the same, sounded the same, but I felt different, as though a fine thread had unraveled somewhere deep inside me and was still pulling, gently but insistently. At work, we passed each other in the hallway, exchanged polite, clipped words in meetings, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Every glance held memory. Every silence felt charged. I could feel where her mouth had been, where her hands had lingered. It was as if my skin remembered more vividly than my mind. And still, we said nothing, not with words, not with questions. We continued with the illusion of normalcy, both of us playing the part, but just beneath the surface, something shimmered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the room dark and heavy, the ceiling too still. My thoughts moved slowly, looping through images I hadn't asked for but couldn't push away. Her face above mine, the shape of her lips when she leaned in, the weight of her thigh draped over me. My body pulsed with the memory of her, the phantom of her touch teasing along my skin like a breeze that wouldn't settle. I turned onto my side, then my back again. Sheets tangled around my legs. My breath came faster than it should have. I reached down without thinking. My fingers moved cautiously at first, brushing along the line of my stomach, hesitating at the edge of my panties. I let them rest there, just long enough to feel the heat building beneath the fabric. Then slowly, quietly, I slipped beneath. My skin was already warm, already slick with need. I parted myself gently, my fingertips gliding along familiar contours, but it felt different now, more immediate, more vivid. I imagined her there, not as fantasy, but as memory. The way her mouth had found me, the rhythm of her tongue, the low sound in her throat when I moaned beneath her. My breath hitched as I pressed a little deeper, circling, teasing, learning myself again through the echo of her. My thighs tensed, my body arching slightly as I moved. I closed my eyes, let my other hand slide up over my breast, cupping it, pinching softly. My hips lifted off the bed, small tremors tightening in my belly, spreading outward in warm, pulsing waves. I whispered her name in my head, over and over, until everything else fell away, and I broke open in a hush of breath and quivering limbs. Afterward, I lay still, one hand resting on my stomach, the other slipping free and falling limply to the mattress. My chest rose and fell in slow, uneven rhythms. I felt flushed, bare in a way that had nothing to do with nudity. I stared at the ceiling, heart still unsteady, body humming. I hadn't done that in months, maybe longer, and never like that, never with someone's memory wrapped so tightly around the act. It wasn't release that lingered, it was her. The trace of her on my skin, beneath my skin, woven into the rhythm of my breath. I didn't feel guilt, only longing. Only the quiet ache of knowing what her touch had awoken. The silence in the room didn't feel empty. It felt chosen. I had made no promises, spoken no vows, but in the quiet, I had said yes. Yes to feeling again, yes to wanting, yes to the part of me that had stopped reaching for joy. That night, I fell asleep without clothes, the sheets cool against my damp skin, her name still echoing softly in my mind. The next time felt inevitable. There was no tension, no stammered invitations or lingering questions. It happened the way leaves give in to gravity in the fall, quietly, with grace, as if everything else had been leading to that moment. She showed up at my door again, a casual knock, a soft expression, no explanation. I opened it without thinking. There was no wine this time, no candlelight or pretense, just her, standing there, eyes holding something steady and familiar. I stepped aside. She walked in. The air inside the house felt different with her there, like it belonged to a different season. I watched her remove her coat, fold it over the back of a chair, brush her hair back behind one ear. She looked at me, waiting. I didn't speak, I just moved toward her. There was a silence between us that was no longer uncomfortable. It held memory, desire, consent. When our bodies met again, it wasn't rushed. There was no uncertainty left. Her hands moved over me with confidence, like she already knew the shape of my longing. I pressed myself against her, drinking in the heat of her skin through our clothes. She smelt like rain and something softer, and I breathed it in like oxygen. My fingers found the hem of her shirt and lifted it slowly. She raised her arms, wordless, allowing. Her skin glowed in the low light. My mouth found her collarbone, and she shivered beneath the touch. She pushed me back toward the bedroom, her hands steady at my waist. We undressed each other slowly, pausing to kiss, to explore, to memorize. Her bra unclasped with ease, her underwear slipped down with a whisper. I stood before her fully exposed, my chest rising fast, my body already warm with anticipation. She reached for me, pulling me into the bed, and I went willingly, my limbs loose, my nerves sparking. She kissed me deeply, like she was pouring something into me that had no name. My legs parted instinctively, and she settled between them, her body fitting against mine with seamless precision. Her thigh pressed into me, creating pressure that made my breath catch. I wrapped my arms around her back, fingers tracing along her spine. Her mouth moved from my lips to my neck, to my shoulder, to my breast. Each place she touched felt claimed. Her tongue circled my nipple, then pulled it into her mouth, and my hips lifted in response, desperate and aching. Her fingers slid down my stomach, dipped between my thighs, parting me gently. I was already wet, already ready. She moved with care at first, slow strokes that made me tremble, and then faster, more confident as I arched against her. I clung to her, burying my face in her shoulder, biting down softly as the tension in me began to crest. She knew the rhythm. She adjusted her angle, her pressure, and I shattered with a cry muffled against her skin, my body pulsing in waves that seemed endless, but she didn't stop. She kept moving, shifting lower, kissing along the line of my hip, the inside of my thigh. Her hands held me open, her breath hot against my most sensitive place. When her tongue met me, I gasped aloud. Her mouth was tender but thorough, her pace slow and deliberate. I gripped the sheets, my toes curled, and my back arched off the mattress. Her name fell from my lips in a broken whisper as she brought me to the edge again. The second release came harder, messier, my legs trembling uncontrollably as she pressed her mouth deeper, drinking in every sound I gave her. When I finally collapsed, she crawled up beside me, her chest slick against mine, her face flushed, her smile lazy and quiet. I reached for her, needing to return the gift she'd just given me. I pushed her onto her back, kissed her neck, her shoulders, the soft curve of her stomach. I trailed lower, tasting her skin, following the tremble in her breath. When my mouth reached the place between her thighs, she moaned softly, hips lifting into my touch. I took my time. I listened to her. I felt her unravel against my tongue, her hands gripping my hair, her breath breaking in waves. She came with a shudder, her whole body curling in on itself. I kissed her thighs, her hips, her belly, then returned to her mouth. We lay tangled, skin damp, breath synced, heart still racing. The sheets were twisted around our legs, the room heavy with heat and scent and something unspoken but understood. I didn't want to speak. Words would have made it smaller somehow. Instead, I held her close and let the silence settle around us like a second blanket. We didn't fall asleep right away. We drifted in and out of touch, her fingers tracing circles on my shoulder, my hand smoothing along the curve of her waist. Every movement was gentle, deliberate, full of new knowledge. When sleep finally came, it was deep and dreamless. I woke once in the night to find her still wrapped around me, her breath steady against my neck. I closed my eyes again and let the warmth pull me under. By morning, everything had already changed. And yet, in the quiet light of dawn, it all felt like it had always been this way. The mornings after became easier. Not because the weight of what happened lessened, but because it no longer felt like something I had to hide from myself. Waking up next to her didn't bring panic. It brought a kind of quiet clarity, like a window finally opened after being stuck shut for too long. The light filtered across the bed, touching her bare shoulder, catching in the loose strands of her hair, and I would just lie there, watching the soft rise and fall of her breathing. The world outside kept its pace, emails, traffic, deadlines, but the space we had created felt separate, like a secret chamber within an otherwise ordinary life. She moved through my house like she belonged there. Her toothbrush appeared next to mine, One of her sweatshirts draped over the back of a kitchen chair. Her coffee order became part of my grocery list. These weren't declarations. They were quiet integrations, signs of a shift that neither of us had to announce. At work, nothing was spoken. We remained professional, poised, deliberate, but there was an ease between us now, something fluid and unguarded. Our eyes would meet across a room, and I'd feel that silent hum pass through me again, no longer unfamiliar, no longer frightening. At home, our routines blended. She would cook while I folded laundry. We'd curl up on the couch with our feet tangled, a movie playing we weren't really watching. Sometimes we didn't talk for hours, and it never felt like absence. It felt like breath, like we had finally allowed ourselves to exhale. There was no rush to define anything. The need for labels faded, replaced by the knowledge that this, whatever it was real. I had stopped wondering what it meant. I had started simply living inside it. The way she looked at me changed, not drastically, but it was there in the softness, in the way her gaze would settle on me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, and the way I responded had changed too. I reached for her more often, not just in bed, but in the small spaces, my fingers brushing hers at the sink, the light press of my palm on her back as we passed in the hallway. It wasn't about secrecy anymore. It was about presence. Nights held a different rhythm now. Sometimes we made love with slow reverence, bodies unfolding into one another as if rediscovering touch with every movement. Other nights, we just held each other, skin to skin, limbs tangled, her breath against my neck grounding me more than any words could. There was a stillness in her that settled me, a quiet knowing I leaned into without resistance. I had moments of reflection, glances in the mirror that lingered. The sound of my own voice softened when I spoke her name. I saw myself differently now. Not younger, not reborn, but more whole, as if a part of me that had long been dormant was now awake and steady. The life I had known before hadn't disappeared. It still existed, just in the background, quieter, less urgent. I no longer lived out of obligation. I moved through my days with intent, with curiosity, with want. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was a choice, a shared language. We didn't speak of the future. We didn't map out what this meant, but every touch, every breath in the dark, every quiet morning spent side by side spoke volumes. I didn't know where we were heading, and for once, that uncertainty didn't terrify me. It felt like possibility. I had learned to live with truth inside my skin. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demanded to be seen, but the kind that pulsed softly beneath the surface, warm and steady. This truth wasn't about answers. It was about presence, about returning home to something I didn't realize I had been missing, about letting myself be held without explanation. Inside this new reality, I found pieces of myself I hadn't dared to look at. Desire, tenderness, boldness. I didn't feel like I had become someone else. I felt like I had finally stopped pretending. This wasn't a story of breaking free. It was a story of arriving, quietly, fully, into something unspoken but deeply understood.